If you've recently left your job, there's some decisions you have to make surrounding your 401k plan. There's really four main options. You can take a cash distribution, you can roll it over to an IRA, you can roll it over to your new employer's plan, or you can leave the balance in your current plan if your balance is high enough. And we're going to assess the pros and cons of each one of those options today. We'll start off by addressing the leave it in the plan option, which is you leave employment with a certain company. You have the option, as long as your balance is over $7,000, by law, they cannot force you to take your money out of that 401k plan. You can elect to keep it invested. You should keep getting statements. You have online access to the account. The only thing that's different is you can no longer make contributions, obviously, to that account because you're no longer on the payroll of that company. So let's discuss the pros and cons of keeping your balance within that former employer's 401k plan. So we'll start with the pros. So number one on the pro side is there's no immediate urgency to do anything. So as long as, again, you have that balance of over $7,000, a lot of times when people either retire or they move to another employer, there's a lot of other life stuff going on that's taking priority over what am I going to do with my 401k balance. So just leaving in the plan gives you some more time. Pro number two is if you go to another employer, you may not yet be eligible to participate in their 401k plan. You may want to roll over your balance from your former employer plan to your new employer plan, but a lot of 401k plans have something called eligibility requirements where they say, hey, you have to be here 3 months, 6 months, 1 year before you're actually eligible to do rollovers. So just leaving it in your old employer plan may be a good option while you're meeting those eligibility requirements in your new plan. Pro number three is the fees may actually be lower in your former employer's 401k plan versus an IRA or your new employer's plan. You really have to do that fee assessment because if, let's say, your old employer was a really big company that has like $500 million amongst all the employees in that 401k plan, you may be paying very low fees, maybe under 0.5%, where if you took your, let's say, $100,000 balance and you roll it over to an IRA and that investment firm just looks at it as a $100,000 account, you may be paying fees of 1% or more. Same thing if you move your balance over to a smaller employer, they may be paying higher fees than that bigger employer 401k plan. The fourth reason why you may want to consider leaving that balance with your former employer is something called the age 55 rule. So if you leave that employer after reaching age 55, there's potentially an exception to the 10% early withdrawal penalty that exists in other types of retirement plans. So in IRA world, if you roll that balance to an IRA and you take a distribution before 59 and a half, you're hit with taxes, but you're also hit with a 10% early withdrawal penalty. But if you leave the employer after obtaining age 55, between age 55 and 59, there is no 10% early withdrawal penalty as long as you withdraw the money directly from that employer plan. Those are the pros. Now let's go over the cons of leaving your balance in that former employer plan. So I'll frequently meet with individuals that have 401k accounts with like 3 or 4 or 5 former employers because they just kind of leave all those accounts behind, and I'll start asking questions like, how much is in each account? How are each account invested? Who are the providers for each 401k plan? And most individuals cannot answer those questions. So by leaving all those orphan 401ks behind, usually is more efficient to start consolidating all those accounts together so you at least know how much you have in total retirement dollars, how those dollars are invested, and essentially where they are. The second con is the administrative hassle of keeping track and updating your personal information with all these scattered 401k plans. So if you move, you might have to reach out to 3 different 401k platforms and give them an updated address or updated email address. We're having it at one spot. It's much easier to manage that. Con number 3 is 401k platforms sometimes have limited investment options. So by leaving it in your former employer plan, they might have said, well, here are the 10 options you have available to you. If you want other options, you might not have the choice. So by actually rolling that balance over to an IRA, you might have unlimited options. Or if you roll it over to a new employer's plan that, let's say, has a brokerage account window, you could open up to different investment strategies. That was all option number 1, which was leave it in the plan. Now we're going to graduate on to option number 2, which is rolling over your 401k balance to an IRA. Now, when you move money from a 401k to IRA accounts, it does not generate a tax liability. It goes from retirement account to retirement account. It's just leaving the company and going now to a retirement account that's individual in your name. And now the reason why I say potentially multiple IRAs is your 401k could have both pre-tax and Roth dollars in it. And when you roll it out, the Roth dollars in the 401k go to your Roth IRA, and the pre-tax dollars go to the traditional IRA. Pros and cons analysis will once again start with the pros of this option, which I just mentioned a few moments ago, is investment freedom. So when you go to the IRA world, you can pretty much invest in whatever you want. Individual stocks, individual bonds, ETFs, mutual funds, CDs. It's completely up to you how you want to invest that IRA. You're not restricted to the fund menu of that 401k plan. Pro number 2 is IRAs allow you to keep all of your retirement accounts consolidated in one spot. So if you have your own personal IRA, as you leave employers, you can keep rolling over those employer plans into your IRAs without having to worry about eligibility requirements or anything like that. It becomes your central hub for your retirement accounts. Pro number 3 with IRAs are the ease of distributions from IRAs versus potentially 401k plans. So sometimes when you request distributions for 401ks, you need to fill out paperwork, and then that paperwork has to be approved by the plan trustee before the distribution is actually dispersed to you. So a little bit more logistics, and if you own the IRA and you want money on the account, you can just do that very seamlessly. And also some 401k plans have distribution restrictions. Some plans are what's called lump sum only, which means once you're a terminated employee and you request any distribution, if you try and request a partial, they say, no, you can't take part of your balance. You have to take it all. So at that point, you're almost forced to either take all the cash or do cash and partial rollover. Advantage number 4 with IRAs is the flexibility around tax withholding. So with 401ks, it is mandatory by law that they have to withhold 20% from Fed tax from all distributions that would otherwise be eligible for rollover. So if you take a $100,000 distribution, they're required to withhold $20,000 for taxes, and you get the net amount. If you first roll over that $100,000 over to your IRA, it goes 100% tax-free. Then if you take a distribution from the IRA, you can decide to withhold no taxes. You could withhold 10%, you could hold 20%, you could withhold 40%. It's completely up to you. The 5th advantage to rolling over your balance to an IRA is potentially having access to professional discretionary asset management. A lot of our clients that have 401k balances, we cannot oversee those retirement account balances on their behalf because they're participant directed, meaning they got to go in and select their own investments and monitor their own investments. As soon as they leave the company, they then have the option to roll over that balance to an IRA with us, and then we're able to actively manage that on their behalf. Now that we've covered the pros, let's go over to the con side, potentially, of rolling a balance from 401k to an IRA. So there's a quick hit list. So on the con side, I would say the fees could be higher in the IRA compared to your existing 401k plan for the reasons I already mentioned. You could potentially lose that age 55, 10% early withdrawal exception that we talked about. And then number 3 is there's no point in probably rolling to an IRA if your intention is to just roll it over to your new employer's plan once you met that plan's eligibility requirements. We're now moving on to option number 3, which is the decision to roll over your former employer's 401k plan to your new employer's 401k plan. So here's a quick hit list of the pros. So number 1 is it allows you to keep your retirement accounts consolidated into your new employer's plan. So roll all those orphan 401ks into one. Number 2 is there's no tax liability for rolling those over to your new employer plan, similar to the IRA. Number 3, you could have potentially lower overall fees in that new employer plan versus rolling it over to an IRA where it's just your balance. Number 4, if the new 401k plan allows loans, those rollover balances could count towards your maximum available loan amount. And number 5, that full balance that you roll into that new employer plan, if you leave that employer after age 55, it could make you eligible for those distributions that avoid that 10% early withdrawal penalty. There is one other big advantage for employees that are still working past age 73, which is when RMDs are set to begin, which are called required minimum distributions. So if you have your money within your current employer's 401k plan and you've already surpassed your RMD age, which right now is 73, with RMDs, the government forces you to start taking money every year out of your pre-tax retirement accounts and paying tax on it. If that balance is within the 401k plan of your current employer, that balance avoids the RMD requirement. But an important note about that RMD exception is the balance has to be in your current employer's 401k plan, not, hey, this was a former employer and I've left there and I left the money in the 401k plan. You have to be employed by that employer for the entire year, including being employed on December 31st, to avoid having to take an RMD for that year if you've reached RMD age. Now let's look at the cons of moving your balance over to your new employer's 401k plan. So here's the hit list. Number one, you're potentially, again, limited to the investment menu offered in your new 401k plan. Number two, you may not be allowed to take distributions at any time from that new 401k account, whereas if you put it in the IRA, you would always have access to take distributions at your choosing. Number three, your personal investment advisor normally cannot manage those assets within the 401k plan if you want active management. And number four, possible distributions and tax withholding restrictions depending on that plan's plan design. The fourth and final distribution option is, of course, the cash distribution from a 401k. And the reason why I save this one for the end is it's usually the least advantageous, because when you take cash distributions from 401k plans, if you're under the age of 59 and a half, not only do you get hit with Fed tax and state tax, but you also get hit with a 10% early withdrawal penalty. So when you start adding all that stuff up, you could be losing 30 to 50% of your account balance in the form of taxes and fees, which isn't fantastic. However, we as financial planners understand that losing a job, especially if it's unexpected, can create some financial hardship for individuals where they say, Mike, I need some money out of that 401k plan in order to meet all my personal expenses until I have found my next job. In that instance, it may make sense to actually roll that balance over to an IRA. So instead of getting taxed on the full balance, you could say, hey, if I have a $50,000 balance, I only need 10 of it to kind of bridge that gap. You take the 10 out, you pay taxes and penalties, but the other 40,000 that's left in that account isn't taxed, and you can continue to maintain that for the future. And if for some reason, let's say the hardship lasts longer than expected, you can always go back to that IRA well and take more money out. I hope this information was helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at greenbushfinancial.com. Thank you.